From the College by the Lake, Coeur d'Alene, Idaho. Local, regional, national, and international guests discussing the issues and topics affecting the way you live are on Forum, the North Idaho College Public Forum, with your host and moderator, political scientist Tony Stewart.
Welcome to today's North Idaho College Public Forum. The issue that we'll be discussing today is the recent passage of the Human Rights Ordinance by the City of Spokane, Washington. It is officially C-32232. This very extensive and comprehensive and well thought out and researched ordinance addresses human rights for most communities or groups within the City of Spokane. In fact, it's the most significant and comprehensive ordinance on human rights east of Seattle in this particular area. We're very pleased to have a member of the government of the City of Spokane to discuss this ordinance with us today. I'm very pleased to welcome to the program Vince Lemus, who is a human rights specialist with the City of Spokane and has been a friend of mine for a number of years. And Vince, it's good to see you again and to welcome you to our program.
Thank you.
He also is the former chair of the Spokane Human Rights Commission, and we'll be getting into questions with you in just a minute about the ordinance. That's what the whole program is going to be about. But I'm very pleased to welcome our two regular panelists to the program again today. First of all is Janelle Burke, who's an attorney in the state of Idaho. And next to her is Steve Shink, who is the Vice President of College Relations and Development at North Idaho College. And as our tradition is, we shall start the questioning with Janelle Burke.
Vince, it's a pleasure to have you here today. You've been involved in this ordinance from the very beginning, I understand. But can you tell us right now where you fit into Spokane city government and how other cities might use an officer of your type in their government?
Well, as Tony had mentioned, I am the human rights specialist for the City of Spokane, and I fit in. I work directly for the assistant city manager, who is a department head for administrative services, and the assistant city manager, of course, works for the city manager.
And you have a commission that you also work with, isn't that true?
Yes, there's a 15-member commission that was established by an ordinance in the City of Spokane about 7 years ago.
And you've worked on that commission as well.
Yes, for a number of years, and then ended up being the chair, and then moved into a position, paid position as a city staff member for that particular commission. So I was heading it, and now I work for that commission.
And this ordinance was drafted by that commission, I take it, or at least some of the support came from that commission.
Yes, much of the support on human rights ordinance did come from the Human Rights Commission, and many members of the commission, although not the whole commission, but many members of the commission were involved in drafting of the ordinance.
Steve Shink.
Vince, was there some event in particular that was a catalyst for this ordinance?
There was no big one single event that drove this, but it was a matter of concern raised by members of the community, and they brought their issue to the mayor, then Jack Garrity, about the issues of discrimination in Spokane, basically saying there's nothing that anybody can do. And Mayor Garrity then turned around and tasked the Human Rights Commission to examine discrimination in Spokane and come up with some viable solutions.
Can you give us a little bit of the history of the development process about how I see from my copy of the ordinance that it's a relatively new ordinance enacted just January 25th, 1999 of this year. How long did it take you to put this document together?
Well, we started back in May of 1997, or around May of 1997, when we first got the charge from the mayors of Spokane.
And were there some significant source documents that where'd you go to as a model, or did you find another community that you thought really modeled the kind of ordinance you wanted to see in Spokane?
The Human Rights Commission and the committee that met to discuss discrimination looked at a number of ordinances from around the country, primarily ordinances that were enacted in the Northwest, since this is where we lived, and many cities are similar in our own particular geographical area.
Another background question, but before I turn this over to Tony, I understand that the ordinance deals with three primary areas: employment, housing, and public accommodation. Yes. Are these areas? I certainly haven't heard much about public accommodation, but I thought housing and employment discrimination was prohibited federally. and perhaps also on the state level. Is that correct? And if it is, where is the need to also do it on the municipal level?
Yes, you are right that discrimination is prohibited on the federal level as well as the state level. Unfortunately, there are some categories that are left out at the federal level and the state level when it comes to discrimination. It's not all-inclusive or as inclusive as many members of our community feel that they should be.
And was that one of your main objectives in drafting this ordinance, to try to fill in those gaps?
Yes. I
see. Thank you.
Thank you, Steve. I want to follow up on that. May I begin, Vince, by first of all commending the Human Rights Commission, the employees of the city of Spokane, and other citizens that were volunteers to work on this. And I guess I want to open with my question to you to say that what the city of Spokane has done through its council passing this ordinance is indicated, if I understand it correctly, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, that what Steve was asking, not only are the people of Spokane recognizing federal and state law that protects different classes and classifications of people from discrimination in housing and jobs and public accommodations, but the city of Spokane, which they can do legally, and states can do this too, even are going beyond what the federal protection is to say we don't want to leave any groups out of the fairness for everyone. Is that a fair evaluation?
That is quite fair, but any really has to be defined.
Yes,
we can't make an ordinance that protects people based on the size of their ears or the color of their shoes. But we wanted to make it as inclusive as we possibly could, and the committee that joined together to discuss discrimination found out that a large portion of discrimination that was taking place in Spokane had to do with sexual orientation,
right.
And
which is missing from federal legislation.
Exactly, federal and state.
Let me go at this from another angle. We're finding that across America there are what we call hate crimes. We've had some real tragedies in recent months. Matthew Shepard in Wyoming. We had who was gay. We had the case in Texas where Mr. Byrd, I believe was the name,
right.
had that horrendous, terrible crime of how he was so brutally killed. So hate crimes, there are groups of people who are targeted because of who they are. And in looking at statistics, and there is a federal law to have reports of these cases on hate crimes, but when we look at it, we really see that a number of people are targeted because of their race and color and national origin. Some people are targeted because of their religion. Gender, women have faced lots of violence. We've seen it in some cases disability, and certainly about the second highest number of incidents of intimidation, harassment, and violence against the gay lesbian community. So what I'm trying to ask is concerning those concerns or proof out there that there is a small minority of people in the country that will not only have prejudice and bigotry but hate and anger towards groups. Does an ordinance like this not only support the rights in housing and jobs and in public accommodations, but does it not also send a message that the community of Spokane believes in protecting the groups that have faced such severe problems? I mean, I think your ordinance sends different messages, not only within Spokane, but the pride of Spokane around the Northwest and in the nation.
Right. It does send a good message that Spokane is an inclusive city. Spokane welcomes folks of different religions, of different races, colors, national origin, and of course, the sexual orientation issue. And it's important for a city, as contemporary as Spokane is becoming, to send that message out to, and I will use this example, businesses who have shied away from coming to Spokane because there is no protection for certain categories of people for their potential employees. And we need to understand that in order to grow, we have to change a little bit and be a little bit more inviting and rid ourselves of those stereotypes that Spokane and Coeur d'Alene and Sandpoint, this area is the hate capital of the world, because that is, I think it's an unfair stereotype for Spokane.
And such an ordinance, this sends a very loud message.
It does.
Not only for recruiting employers, also with well-paying jobs, which that does, but also tourism and
Sure.
for people to come and feel comfortable, and even from the cultural aspects of not only tourists but different events and cultural events. This sends a more warm message.
Yes, I think it does. I think the city of Spokane has stepped up to the plate and said, you're welcome here.
I have two more questions, and I'll go back to the panel. The next question is, I think this ordinance does, and of course, the good citizens of Spokane say vote on different issues, which they do, and so forth. Does it create an additional pride in the community, saying we stand up and say no to discrimination?
Yes, and that's the nice thing about it. We can not only say with our lips that we know discrimination is wrong, but we can actually share with people that we do care about the people of Spokane and the visitors to Spokane, and then we can not only show that we know we care, but we can also act on that. So it's putting into action the things that we think and the things that we feel.
And one final question back to the panel, and that is, would you mind reading from the ordinance all categories of people who are covered under the ordinance, please?
Sure, I can do that. And I'll just start with the beginning of the paragraph under the findings.
Sure.
The city of Spokane finds that discrimination based on race, religion, color, sex, national origin, marital status, familial status, age, sexual orientation, disability poses a substantial threat to the health, safety, and general welfare of the citizens of Spokane. The city deems it necessary and proper to enact a local ordinance to address these issues.
Thank you very much. Janelle Burke.
Now I want to get right into what the ordinance says some more. What does it say about employment? What are the provisions that deal with employment? What does it guarantee for the citizens of Spokane?
That guarantees that people will be evaluated on their merit and their capabilities and their qualifications, rather than their race and their religion, their sexual orientation, their sex. And it's interesting in that it's been done on an amateurization schedule, in that for the year 1999, the ordinance will apply to employers who have 25 or more employees. And then in next year, it will be for employers who have 15 or more, and then it goes down to 8 or more in the year 2001.
So it's going to gradually include more and more of what we might call the small employer.
Yes.
In the city of Spokane.
Right.
What about housing? What are the provisions that protect people as far as housing is concerned?
Housing, again, you're evaluated on your ability to meet the rent. Source of income was an issue that was dropped out of the ordinance, or, well, later in the process after the ordinance was established. In order to keep the ordinance on the table, we had to eliminate source of income as a protected category. But again, landlords who are not in the business of renting or leasing homes or property cannot discriminate based on those areas that I read earlier.
Now, familial status, I would take it, probably is an issue in this area. How do you define familial status, and what do you mean by it? How does it apply?
Well, it's the relationship between two or more individuals. One of it, at least, has not attained the years, 18 years of age, and is living with that particular parent or guardian. And or pregnancy is also another issue that is covered under familial status. And also it's written here in point number 3 under paragraph F that is in the process of securing legal custody of an individual who has not attained 18 years of age. So somebody who's going to gain a child or is in the process of gaining another child.
Would be protected if let's say that you move into an apartment and two females wish to live together who both have children. Is this the kind of thing that would be covered?
Yes.
They may be persons who are on welfare, for example, who are sharing for economic reasons an apartment. And I take it then that the landlord is unable to discriminate against them by saying, you are not going to be allowed to live in my apartment.
Well, if the landlord were to say, you're not going to live in my apartment or my apartment building because you're on welfare, that would be source of income discrimination. And yes, a landlord would be able to do that.
But if they're saying because we're
Because you're not a
in
family.
essence putting two families together here in one unit, then that would be,
That could be a
prohibited
complaint.
under the ordinance.
Yes.
What about public accommodations? What do you mean by public accommodations?
The mere act of walking into a restaurant or a hotel and being denied service would be an example of a place of public accommodation discriminating against a certain person, again, based on those categories that I read earlier.
Now, walking you through a little further, there are some, if you violate this ordinance, there are some ways that you will be, that it will be enforced. What are those ways?
Well, there's the enforcement, and then there is the issue before enforcement, which we will try to use in many cases, and that's the use of mediation, the alternative dispute resolution process. And that's going to be done, and I kind of like the way that's been drafted, in that an independent mediation agency or agencies or an independent mediator would be contacted and then contracted with the city to perform a mediation between the disputants. And of course, that is not going to be mandatory, of course, because we can't make mediation mandatory. It takes a collaborative effort between the disputant and the respondent. And so we're going to try and use that first as a means to resolve complaints in many cases.
Can I just interrupt and say that what it sounds like they're trying to do here is you're trying to stay out of court and prevent the court cost,
Yes.
and also order. And this ordinance a lot of times would encourage people to talk, would it not?
Right, and again, the city has stepped up and said, we will fund that mediation process for you to keep things at the lowest level.
And I'm sure many of these disputes are what we would call minor disputes for the most part. In other words, they're very important to the people that are involved, but they don't involve a lot of money.
Correct, yes.
Certainly outside of employment. Employment might be an exception, but in terms of housing or public accommodations.
Right.
Steve Sheen.
Vince, as we mentioned earlier, this is a bill without a lot of history behind it in Spokane. But what was the early reaction as it was being discussed to the concept of an ordinance like this one?
The early reaction from whom?
The community, people in Spokane, concerned groups, supporters, opponents.
There were more opponents than there were supporters. But I think that as the ordinance went on in the drafting process, more people came out to say, we have a problem here in Spokane and we need to do something about it. Even to the point where people came to the city council meetings and voiced their opinions, primarily against the ordinance, and said some pretty hurtful things. Mm-hmm. And that caught the attention of some of our city council members who recognized that as a result of that public testimony, recognized that there is a problem with lack of acceptance or a great intolerance in Spokane, and that I would say played a big part in forming their judgment.
So in a way, in an ironic way, that the opponents may have helped prove the need for this ordinance.
That is a possibility.
Has any tests yet? Have you? And I really like the mediation feature. Has anything gone to mediation yet? Any complaints been filed?
No complaints have been filed to date.
What, as you look around, and I think Tony in his introduction, or maybe in our pre-show discussions, we heard that this is one of the most significant ordinances adopted east of Seattle in the Northwest region. What are you seeing in communities similar in size to Spokane around the country? Is this a common thing to have? Are they growing? More and more of these being adopted?
The interest is certainly growing. By some measure, this information got on the internet, and I received a call about a week after the ordinance was passed from somebody in Florida who wanted to know about our ordinance and how our process worked. And since then, I've been contacted by another city in King County who wanted to know about our ordinance and how the process went. And so there's some interest out there, and we're more than happy to share all of our information with anybody that would want to have it, because it is important to have some sort of legislation so that cities can say, this is where we stand as a municipality.
I wonder if during this process you also created some supporters, and I'm thinking particularly of business groups. I know that our experience here in Coeur d'Alene, and I would certainly agree that I think the whole region has been unfairly and inaccurately portrayed as a haven for racists. I don't think that's true, but perception is reality, and the reality is there are groups that feel that way, and that perception can hurt business in this area. I've seen it. Groups that wanted to come to Coeur d'Alene but didn't because some members felt that they would not be safe here or they wouldn't be welcome here. Right. And I think there are some strong business supporters for issues like this in Coeur d'Alene. Did you find that in Spokane as well?
Well, we didn't have a whole lot of contact with the business community on enacting the ordinance. This was primarily a grassroots level, although it was brought to the attention of the committee that many organizations and large businesses within the city limits do have specific measures to address issues of discrimination that are not covered by state and federal laws.
Thank you.
So I hear you saying that some of the businesses that are very progressive already have placed in their employment manuals and all policies something very similar. So is the ordinance somewhat complementing what some of the businesses are doing?
Yes, it is. It's very complementary to their own policies.
Another question I have, and you brought it up in answering Steve's question, is again, we're taping this show at early March. And it won't air until a couple months later in May, and so there may be some things happen between now and then. I want the viewers to know that's when we taped it, but you may have a lot more evidence by the time it airs. But the fact that you are starting to receive telephone calls from King County and from Florida, I think that's just the opening round of that. So I'd like to get you to react to that. As we said earlier in the show, is it possible that this will become, after working on it for so many months, and you did listen to different groups and factions about it, you were sensitive to that, and working out a lot of details, could it possibly become a model that Spokane could be proud to share with other communities, that what you've done may not have to be reinvented, and therefore other communities might just take a look at your ordinance for possible adoption in other cities?
I certainly hope so. I would really like to put Spokane on the human rights map and say that we're leaders, and we will assist anybody who wants to form a human rights ordinance or who wants to use this as a model. Sure.
Well, as these calls may increase, are you sending a message around the country that will affect people as they come through, that they feel better? Or again, we go back to the economics, or students who may want to go to college at all the fine colleges that you have in the area. Spokane is gifted and talented and fortunate to have so many colleges, so that can affect those institutions and the students that they may recruit for lots of purposes.
The positive impact is enormous, just enormous.
Let me give one other example, and then I'll go back to Janelle. I recently was invited to speak at a conference in Las Vegas, Nevada, a rather large conference, and they had decided to have their conference there, but they also have quarterly board meetings, and they had canceled a board meeting at Coeur d'Alene because, again, of this unfair image. And so I was invited to speak before this conference, and I took a lot of documentation about how people here do stand up against discrimination and bigotry and prejudice, and I can say that the next time I give a speech, and by the way, at the end of the speech, some members of the board apologized and said they wish they'd have known the real story, and that's true of Spokane or Coeur d'Alene. So the next time I'm invited to give a national speech, it would be my desire to take your ordinance with me to give another piece of evidence of how the people feel. So you might take that back as an avenue that may be used by others.
Definitely, and you can even take me with you.
Okay. I think I'm going to be speaking at a national conference soon, and it's in a beautiful, warm place, and it's going to be in the fall when.
In that case, you could take me too, Tony.
Maybe let's take this whole show with us. Janelle Burke.
Last round, I asked you a question about what were some of the penalties if a person violated, and I'd like to follow up on that, because we talked about mediation, which I agree is a great first step to resolving the differences without having to get into the court system or without having that on a record. But what happens if mediation is not successful, Or if the person continues to violate, what are the penalties?
It's a very simple process. Somebody can file a complaint within a year after the last act of discrimination. It's going to be dealt with in the municipal court, and it's going to be dealt with as a Class 1 civil infraction. There's not a whole lot of remedies available. There's no mandatory reinstatement of employment or lost wages, anything like that. It will be a straight $250 fine to that employer, to that landlord, or to the proprietor of that place of public accommodation if discrimination is confirmed.
Nonetheless, it sends a message that it is important not to discriminate. Now, if I'm a person who feels like something has happened to me that might fall within this ordinance, what should I do? Should I call your office? Who do I call? Where do I begin this process? And is there a form to fill out then that must be filled out? So why don't you walk us through that process a little bit? What do I do if I'm that person who believes that I might have a complaint?
If you believe you have a complaint and it's more or less the same as it is right now, if somebody has a human rights complaint, they call 625-6263, which is my office. And
can you give us that number again? 509-625-6263. And okay.
That's my office, and I'm the only one there at the moment. There will be additional staff coming. But they would call me and air their complaint to me over the phone. And sometimes it may or may not be discrimination, and we can usually tell I can usually tell right at the very beginning, and usually invite people to come and see me, and I will assist them in filling out a complaint form or give them a complaint form to complete on their own. There's also the availability of filing a complaint over the internet. Somebody can go to our Spokane City webpage, look up human rights, and our complaint form is right there. Of course, at one time or another, they will need to come and see me.
On that note, I have to bring the program to conclusion, and I thank you, Vince Lemus, the Human Rights Specialist City of Spokane. It's been wonderful having you on the program. I thank the panel for their fine questions. And ladies and gentlemen, we've very much enjoyed bringing this program on a new ordinance, a very significant historical ordinance in the city of Spokane that will be looked at throughout the future, I'm sure, as a significant development within the city of Spokane and the inland Northwest. I would like to invite you to be with us again next week at this same time when we'll move to yet another issue. Each week we try to bring you another question, an issue, and we hope that you'll join us at that time. Until then, please have a good week. I am Tony Stewart.
The North Idaho College Public Forum was videotaped live from the studios of Instructional Technology on the campus of North Idaho College for viewing at this more appropriate time. We invite you to join us again next week for another all-new edition of the North Idaho College Public Forum on this public television station.